Coming up on this Thursday edition of Newsline at noon, efforts to restart the six-nation talks aimed at ending North Korea's nuclear program gather pace, but South Korea's envoy says Pyongyang needs to show it sincerely wants to denuclearize. Citing deteriorating trading terms, the central bank says Korea's gross national income grew at the slowest pace in 2.5 years in the July to September period. Plus, the U.S. Justice Department promises a probe on the death of a black man after a grand jury decided not to indict a white police officer who choked him to death. These stories and more on Newsline at noon. It's noon Thursday, December 4th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Eojin Ju.
It's very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom, and we start with news that the resumption of the long-stalled six-party talks on North Korea's denuclearization has taken a big step closer toward becoming reality.
Right. This after South Korea expressed a willingness to come back to the table if North Korea first meets a couple of conditions. Hwang Seung-hee reports.
South Korea is ready to return to the six-party nuclear talks. All North Korea has to do is show that it's serious about giving up its nuclear weapons. Following talks with its Russian counterpart in Moscow on Wednesday, South Korea's chief nuclear envoy Hwang Jung-guk said the five parties, including Russia and China, agree on the need for some preconditions for the multilateral dialogue. That, however, doesn't mean the North must take specific steps before returning to the negotiating table. Hwang said that beginning the talks without North Korea showing a sincere attitude about denuclearization would be meaningless. He added Pyongyang must show a willingness to engage in a constructive dialogue. The multilateral denuclearization talks, involving the two Koreas, the U.S., China, Japan, and Russia, haven't been held since late 2008. But a recent flurry of diplomatic activity among the six parties has fueled hopes of getting the ball rolling again. Washington's new special representative for North Korea policy, Sung Kim, will meet with Hwang in Seoul on Friday as part of a three-nation trip that also takes him to Japan and China. This while North Korean officials and American security experts are reportedly arranging a meeting in Singapore next month. Diplomatic sources say North Korea's chief nuclear negotiator Lee Yong-ho and former U.S. nuclear envoy Stephen Bosworth are among the likely attendees. Hwang Seung-hee, Arirang News.
Moscow is likely to gain majority control over the management of a joint railway project involving the two Koreas and Russia. A South Korean consortium is in talks with state-owned Russian railways to establish a special-purpose corporate body that would acquire stakes of Rasan-Contrans, a North Korea-Russia joint venture in charge of the project. Korea would hold a 49% stake, with Russia making up a majority of 51%. An official in the South Korean consortium said they were working to make sure they have at least partial control over the project to ensure stability. The three-way trade deal involves delivering coal from the Russian station of Hasan to North Korea's port of Najin on a 54-kilometer railway. The South Korean consortium is expected to ink a formal contract with Russia next year. A well-known and widely read tech blog is reporting that Sony Pictures will announce North Korea as a source of the cyber attack that paralyzed the company's computer systems for over a week. But there is some confusion now, as a spokesperson for Sony has reportedly texted a news agency saying the investigation is still ongoing. Kwon So-ah has the latest.
The cyber attack on Sony Pictures has turned into an international case of whodunit, but many accusing fingers have been pointing squarely in North Korea's direction. Raising those suspicions a notch, popular tech blog Recode reported Wednesday that Sony will name North Korea as the source of the hacking attack. Highly destructive malware knocked out the company's computer systems for over a week and leaked a massive amount of data, including a few unreleased movies, onto the internet. Citing two sources close to the probe, the blog said details are being finalized and an official announcement will come very soon. But soon after, the Associated Press reported that Sony has not yet reached any conclusions. The news agency says it received a text message from a Sony spokesperson who said the investigation is ongoing and that Recode's report was not accurate. Intrigue abounds about the hacking attack as North Korea sought to stop Sony from releasing its comedy film called The Interview that depicts two American journalists sent to the North to assassinate leader Kim Jong-un. That movie, however, was not one of the 5 DVD screeners leaked online. But a number of security experts doubt the hacker group that identified itself as the Guardians of Peace has something to do with North Korea, despite earlier reports that Korean code was found inside the hackers' malware. Some even speculate the attack may have been carried out by a disgruntled employee. Pyongyang has yet to deny it was behind the attack. The regime has been quoted as saying, "Wait and see to find out." Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
And a U.S. expert on Northeast Asian affairs says North Korea has some of the best hacking capabilities in the world. And this is why he suggests that a mutual defense treaty between Seoul and Washington should include measures against cyber warfare, especially against the threats posed by Pyongyang's elite band of hackers. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
Good afternoon, ladies.
Speaking at a cyber defense meeting in Washington, specialist in Northeast Asian affairs at Johns Hopkins University, Alexander Manzarov pointed out that North Korea has continuously enhanced its cyber hacking capabilities over the past decade. He emphasized that Pyongyang is now capable of penetrating both Seoul and Washington's internet networks, with an army of hackers totaling in the thousands.
Now, 10 years later, the South Koreans believe it's almost 6,000, but probably it's twice as much.
In order to better deal with Pyongyang's cyber threats, some experts believe defense measures should be included in the Korea-U.S. Mutual Defense Treaty, similar to a NATO agreement that calls for collective defense against cyber attacks.
The NATO member states agreed to that a large-scale cyber attack against a member country could be considered an attack on the entire alliance.
North Korea has also been suspected of taking part in Iran's recent hacking of 50 government and private firms across 16 nations, as Korea was the second most targeted country behind U.S.
Knowing what level of access they have into over 50 different companies around the world tells us what they could do if they wanted to in terms of controlling critical infrastructure, our physical world, transportation, you name it. So
experts say Seoul will need to invest more and upgrade its cyber defense system to the level of Israel's cyber Iron Dome if it wants to become less vulnerable to North Korea's virtual online war. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
A memorial marking the sacrifices made by British troops during the Korean War has been unveiled in central London. Britain sent the second largest number of troops to the peninsula back then, and coming more than 60 years after the end of the war, London is the last capital city among the Allied forces in the Korean War to have such a monument. Britain sent more than 80,000 troops to Korea during the war, and more than 1,100 of them died in the conflict. Some 300 British war veterans attended the unveiling of the memorial, which was paid for by the South Korean government, Korean companies, and Koreans living in the UK. To mark the day, Queen Elizabeth II sent a congratulatory speech that was read on her behalf by the Duke of Gloucester. Take a look.
The memorial is a fitting tribute to the veterans of that fierce conflict and will ensure that they and their fallen comrades are never forgotten.
The British veterans have been pushing for the establishment of the memorial since 2011, and they expressed hope the sacrifices of their brothers would never be forgotten.
Yes, now Korea's economy is generally considered to be on the steady road to recovery. The only problem is gross national income, a key indicator of the country's purchasing power, is not really keeping up pace with the other indicators. The figure did rise slightly in the third quarter, but it was at the slowest pace in well over 2 years. Hwang Jie reports.
The purchasing power of Korea's population is lagging behind the country's economic growth. The Bank of Korea says the national income edged up 0.3% in real terms in the third quarter from the previous one, the slowest pace of expansion in 2.5 years. The central bank attributes the slower growth to worsening trade conditions and a drop in net foreign factor income. This refers to the difference between the amount a country's citizens and companies earn abroad and the total amount foreign citizens and overseas companies earn in that country. Exports also fell more than 2% in the third quarter from a quarter earlier, marking the first drop in a year. Overall economic activities remain on the recovery track as the country's gross domestic product grew 0.9% in the July to September period from the previous quarter. The third quarter figure matches an estimate made in late October and the roughly 1% growth posted a year earlier. It also marks an improvement from 0.5% growth in the second quarter. From a year earlier, however, Korean economy grew 3.2% in the last quarter, slowing from 3.5% growth in the second quarter. Key indicators also point to a still sluggish economy, with facility investments down 0.5% on quarter compared with a 1.1% rise 3 months earlier. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Korea may have to shelve plans to launch a lunar probe in the year 2020 due to budget constraints. Some $38.6 million was due to be funneled into the first stages of a moon exploration project in next year's budget, but the Parliamentary Budget Committee failed to reflect this in its revised version this week, and this has left the space program with zero cash for the project next year. That means plans to launch a test orbiter in 2017 and then land a homegrown probe on the moon in 2020 are almost certain to be postponed now. It's estimated that more than $600 million will be needed to fund this very ambitious lunar project. Korea's National Commission on Space will begin reviewing and revising its plans next week. Over half of the 23 Korean firms that have been delisted this year were in the information and communications technology sector. Korea's Institute for Information and Communications Technology Promotion reports that 12 ICT-related firms were removed from the stock exchange in the January to October period. 9 of them were delisted for poor management performance. 3 merged with other firms. Adding to the concerns about the sector, 10% of Korea's 353 public ICT corporations were classified as risky in October. The report says the instability is due to the rapid growth of China's ICT industry and the rapid depreciation of the Japanese yen.
Let's get a check on the global headlines now with our Eunice Kim standing by at the News Center.
Eunice, first Ferguson, now New York City. A grand jury in America's most populous city has decided there was insufficient evidence to indict a white police officer who fatally locked an unarmed black man in a chokehold.
Right, and that confrontation was recorded on video viewed by many online. The case, as you can suspect, has ignited more frustration, more protests, and more discussions about police and race relations in the United States. Shin Se-min has this story.
The racial divide in the United States is once again in the spotlight. This after a grand jury in New York City declined to indict a white New York City police officer in the death of an unarmed black man. The victim, Eric Garner, was stopped by NYPD officer Daniel Pantaleo on suspicion of selling cigarettes illegally on Staten Island in July. Video of the encounter shows the officer using a chokehold on Garner, a technique that is forbidden under the NYPD's patrol manual. Garner, who had a number of health problems, died minutes later of a heart attack. The decision comes less than 2 weeks after a grand jury in Ferguson, Missouri decided not to indict Officer Darren Wilson in the shooting death of an unarmed black teen, Michael Brown. That case set off weeks of demonstrations, and following the grand jury decision in New York, protests broke out throughout the city.
Mr. Garner's death is one of several recent incidents across our great country that have tested the sense of trust that must exist between law enforcement and the communities they are charged to serve and to protect.
The Department of Justice plans to open an investigation to determine whether Garner's civil rights were violated. President Obama called for change in the way police interact with the community around them.
I'm not interested in talk, I'm interested in action, and I am absolutely committed as President of the United States to making sure that we have a country in which everybody believes in the core principle that we are equal under the law.
Referring to the recent cases, President Obama told a group of Native American leaders that the decision speaks to the concern on the part of too many minority communities that law enforcement is not working with them. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
And staying in the U.S., a group of 17 states led by Texas has sued the Obama administration for what it views as illegal immigration action that places a heavy burden on state budgets. Texas Governor-elect and Attorney General Greg Abbott filed the lawsuit on Wednesday that asks for not monetary damage, but a ruling to declare the November 20th executive action illegal. He said his state, bordering Mexico, is already shouldering millions of dollars in costs related to illegal immigration. Many Republican stronghold states joined Texas in the suit, including Alabama, Idaho, and Utah. They argue President Obama has exceeded his constitutionally mandated role of enforcing laws as opposed to making them. The White House has said it acted within guidelines as it urged Congress to pass long-stalled immigration reform bills. Sweden's prime minister has called for snap elections, the country's first in more than 50 years. Announcing the March 22nd polls, Prime Minister Stefan Löfven said Wednesday Sweden is in a serious and difficult situation after the government's first budget was rejected by parliament. The current administration's coalition of Social Democrats and Greens is viewed as the weakest in decades, as it faces a threat by anti-immigration Sweden Democrat Party to make the country effectively ungovernable unless the government adopts tough policies on immigration, such as cutting 90% of people seeking asylum. Sweden's king has also expressed his hope that good would come out of the fresh elections next year. Finally, 2014 may almost be over, but it's also on track to be the hottest year on record, this according to the UN Weather Agency. The World Meteorological Organization said the global average temperature in the year's first 10 months was the same as the record hot year of 2010 at 0.57 Celsius above the average. It said ocean temperatures set a new record, while land temperatures clocked in at the fourth or fifth highest on record. While countries like the U.S. and Canada were struck with early winter-like conditions, countries in the southern hemisphere, such as Australia, Argentina, and South America, were hit with heat waves this year.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea, connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on Newsline at Noon with Mark Broom and Jin-Ju.
Even I'm Jin-Ju with Pro.
Market researcher, strategy analytics, said Thursday that LG Electronics.
Last-minute touches are being put to a plant in Korea's southern port city of Busan that, in less than a month, will provide almost 50,000 tons of drinking water for the city every day, and that drinking water will come from the sea. For more on the nation's first desalination plant, here's our Connie Lee.
It's this seawater surrounding Korea's southern coast that's being turned into fresh, drinkable water. Korea now has its very first desalination plant built and ready to go for full operation starting in January. Located in the southern port city of Busan, the $175 million plant can pump in about 100,000 tons of water per day from the ocean and remove the salt and turn it into 45,000 tons of fresh water, enough for about 150,000 residents in the city. This high-tech facility was built by Korea's very own Tusan Heavy Industries and Construction, currently the #1 leader in the desalination plant market.
Our company has been building these plants and working on desalination technology for about 40 years now. We built this one to help expand our overseas market and prepare for future water shortages.
The purified water has been certified as safe to drink by the Busan Water Authority, and the cost for consumers will be the same as fresh water from other sources. So is Korea facing a water shortage? Well, not right now, but potentially yes. According to a recent UN report, by the year 2030, nearly half of the global population will face water shortages due to demand exceeding water supply.
The world is headed towards water shortages. Desalination plants are one way to fight water scarcity. And in the past 2 to 3 years, the number of these plants has grown tenfold.
There are currently more than 16,000 desalination plants worldwide, and in the face of water scarcity, that number is expected to increase in the years to come. Connie Lee, Arirang News, Busan.
Now, it's well known around the world that Korea and also Japan both have chronically low birth rates, a big problem for both countries. And encouraging people to tie the knot has long been seen as a logical solution to this big problem, as having children outside of wedlock is considered a big cultural no-no in both countries. But for more on how Korean and Japanese people think about marriage, Kim Min-ji reports.
An aging population and low birth rate, two problems that Korea and Japan have in common and are trying to solve. And since having children out of wedlock is considered socially unacceptable in either country, the focus is on encouraging people to get married. So the countries share similar problems, but do the people of Korea and Japan share similar views on marriage? A report by the Korea Institute for Health and Social Affairs says no. In surveys on over 10,000 single men and women from Japan between the ages of 18 and 49 and 1,500 Koreans in the same age group, more than 80% of Korean men said marriage comes with benefits, while just about 60% of Japanese men agreed. As for women, roughly 7 in 10 from both countries said marriage was beneficial. Their reasons? Koreans were more based on emotion. The #1 reason given was knowing they could rely on their spouse for emotional support. Being allowed to live with their loved one came next on the list. The Japanese respondents, on the other hand, tended to be more practical, with the #1 reason being to have children. This was trailed by emotional support and fulfilling the expectations of their parents and relatives. But, as we all know, marriage comes after dating. But Japanese men seem to be more reluctant about dating than Korean men. Nearly 3/4 of Japanese men who took the survey said they were not in a relationship, in comparison with 66% of Korean men. The report says all this stems from Japan's prolonged economic slump, which has changed their spending patterns, making them focus more on their own life rather than a relationship. However, it warns that Korea is no exception to the situation, given its slow economic growth, and call for efforts to reduce the burdens on young people that keep them from tying the knot. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Well, it's another freezing day. The low in Seoul started off the day at -7, and the high will only hike up to -1. And it seems like we need to get ready for the coldest day of the season, which is tomorrow, with the low plunging to -9. But at least it's not snowing up north. People in the Jeollado provinces and the surrounding areas have been receiving snowfall for 4 consecutive days, and it's forecasted to snow till Saturday. But other regions can expect to have a clear skies with a slight chance of snow flurries in the capital area. With that, here are the readings for today. Now, while the afternoon high in Seoul rises to -1, Daegu and Gwangju peak at 5, and Busan will top out at 7 this afternoon. And as for the other regions, Jeju will be getting up to 8, while Daejeon and Tukdo sees highs of 1 and 3. Now, no snow is in store for a while for Seoul, but mid-winter-like temperatures continue till early next week, so please stay warm and safe in the cold weather. Now, that's all for Korea, and here's international weather for viewers around the world.
And that brings us to the end of our Thursday edition of Newsline at Noon.
Jinju and I will be back at the same time, 12 noon tomorrow, Friday, Korea time. Till then, goodbye.